Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're unpacking a massive collision of policies. We're going to look at how domestic economic strategies are about to just run headfirst into an unprecedented global shift. I promise you a highly thorough, truly comprehensive breakdown of the future of Philippine fiscal incentives under the OECD Pillar 2 framework. Look, if you've been following international tax law, you already know a storm is brewing, right? And the stakes for developing economies and literally millions of jobs couldn't be higher.
Let's just take a quick look at our agenda. We're covering the evolution of Philippine tax incentives, the actual cost of that tax relief, the new global minimum tax rules, the incentive paradox, and finally, recalibrating for the future.
All right, jumping right into part one, the evolution of Philippine tax incentives.
Okay, let's dive into this. For decades, developing nations have used tax incentives as a huge magnet to attract foreign investment, right? And the foundation of the current Philippine system is the CREATE Act from 2021. Think of this as a massive 1 trillion peso pandemic-era stimulus package. The government absolutely needed to keep businesses afloat, protect jobs, and bring in new capital during a crisis. Their main tool? Heavy tax reductions. They lowered the corporate income tax rate to 25% and leaned hard into income tax holidays, basically saying, hey, come build your factories here and we won't tax your income for years.
Well, they didn't stop there. By 2024, they doubled down with the Create More Act. The crucial change here? The threshold for investments requiring review by the Fiscal Incentives Review Board jumped from 1 billion pesos all the way up to 15 billion pesos. No way around it, that is a drastic bump. It was explicitly designed to cut red tape, streamline approvals, and quickly restore investor confidence by making these generous tax breaks incredibly easy to access.
And as you'll see here, these domestic incentives are clearly working. Between 2021 and 2024, there was a steady 20% overall increase in registered businesses taking advantage of these breaks. That's real capital, physical infrastructure being built, and real jobs flowing into the country purely because of this highly competitive tax environment. Moving on to Section 2, the cost of tax relief.
Because obviously, in economics, nothing is actually free. Let this number sink in for a second. 462.9 billion pesos. That is the sheer scale of foregone revenue in 2023 alone. Money the Philippine government actively gave up. They essentially walked away from nearly 500 billion pesos in potential tax collections, strategically sacrificing that public revenue to secure corporate investments and generate mass employment.
So where is all this tax relief actually going? Well, manufacturing absolutely dominates the pie, taking about 72.4% of the foregone revenues between 2021 and 2023. This is a very deliberate industrial policy. The country is making a massive push for export-oriented production-intensive activities. They want physical factories building physical goods, and they're willing to heavily subsidize that sector to make it happen.
And administratively, almost all of this flows through one primary channel. The Philippine Economic Zone Authority, or PIZA, handles the absolute lion's share. Just in 2023, they administered 367.4 billion pesos of that relief. They are the crucial gatekeeper here, managing the special economic zones where these tax-exempt factories actually operate.
Which brings us to Section 3, Enter Global Minimum Tax Rules.
Okay, time to zoom out. Because out on the global stage, a massive disruption is looming over all these local Philippine policies. Enter OECD Pillar 2. For those unfamiliar, this is a coordinated international framework agreed upon by over 130 countries. The goal is simple but totally revolutionary. Establish a global minimum effective tax rate for large multinational enterprises, specifically those making over 750 million euros in revenue. It's basically an unprecedented effort to stop the race to the bottom where countries just endlessly undercut each other's tax rates.
And here is the magic number, 15%. Under Pillar 2, 15% is the new absolute global floor. If a massive multinational pays less than a 15% effective tax rate anywhere they operate, these new rules kick in to ensure that the 15% threshold is met regardless. This is the critical threshold that's going to completely fundamentally change the math for international investors.
Which actually brings us to a pretty shocking piece of data. Thanks to all those generous income tax holidays we talked about earlier, the average effective tax rate for large corporations in the Philippines was estimated to be just 6.36% in 2022. That is a massive gap. This aggressive domestic strategy has pushed these companies way below the new global floor, putting them squarely in the crosshairs of the 15% rule. It's virtually guaranteeing a conflict.
So let's get into Section 4, the incentive paradox explained.
We're looking at an inevitable collision here. Deep local tax cuts running straight into strict global tax minimums. It leads us to a multi-billion-dollar question. What actually happens when domestic tax incentives successfully drop a multinational's effective rate to, say, that 6.36%, but the global rules absolutely demand 15%? This creates what experts call the incentive paradox, and it's the central mystery we're going to solve right now.
Now, what's really interesting about this is how the global minimum tax rules treat different tax breaks. They aren't all equal. Core income-based incentives, like the income tax holiday and the special corporate income tax, are fully exposed. They are included in the math, meaning they drag your effective rate down and trigger the global rules. But look at the indirect taxes, like VAT exemptions and customs duties. Those are excluded. They're completely safe from the global minimum tax calculations.
So, for those exposed income taxes, here is the paradox in action. It's all about top-up taxes. If the Philippines gives a corporation a tax holiday so they only pay 6%, the corporation's home country, let's say Japan or the US, will just look at the math, apply the Pillar 2 rules, and literally collect a 9% top-up tax themselves to reach that 15% total. Think about that for a second. By offering an income tax holiday, the Philippines loses out on billions in revenue, but the investor doesn't even get to keep the savings. They still pay the tax, just to their home country instead. The Philippine government's whole effort to be competitive, completely neutralized.
Which leads us to our final part, Section 5, recalibrating for the future.
Okay, so if traditional income tax holidays are just going to be canceled out by foreign governments, what comes next? Well, the strategy requires a comprehensive structural shift. To survive this new global era, policymakers simply can't hand out blanket income tax holidays anymore. Instead, they've got to pivot toward cost-based incentives, things that lower the actual cost of doing business, like subsidizing energy or training. They need to prioritize performance-driven instruments, or companies get support for hitting very specific targets. And crucially, they have to maximize those indirect tax exemptions like VAT and customs duties, because as we just saw, those are safely outside the reach of the global minimum tax.
To sum up this pivot, I want to read a quote directly from the Congressional Policy and Budget Research Department's paper. It says, "The changing global tax environment may drive a structural shift in incentive design to sustain competitiveness, enhance fiscal efficiency, and preserve domestic taxing rights." This really hits the nail on the head. Fiscal incentives aren't dying, they are just evolving. Nations have to adapt to make sure that when they give up tax revenue, it actually benefits the investor and the local economy, rather than just funneling a top-up tax straight into the treasury of some foreign nation.
So the crucial takeaway here is that the rules of the game have permanently changed. Income tax holidays used to be the ultimate weapon for attracting global capital, but OECD Pillar 2 has pretty much disarmed them, which leaves us with a massive question looking ahead. In an increasingly coordinated global tax regime, how will developing nations continue to compete for foreign investment? They're going to have to get creative, highly targeted, and incredibly efficient. It's a brand new era for global economic competition. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer.